Welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So just to note under item 1 that the meeting's being streamed live and recorded by the Council for subsequent broadcast via the Council's website. I'm going to ask everyone who's here in the room to introduce themselves for the benefit of anyone who's watching online. So I'll start with myself. I'm Matt White and I'm a councillor and I'm chair of this committee. And to my left.
Hi, Councillor Pippa Connor, Vice Chair of this committee and Chair of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee.
Hi, I'm Councillor Anna Lawton, Chair of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel.
Hello, I'm Councillor Adam Small and Chair of our Housing Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel.
Hi, I'm Tara Neves, Corporate Director for Finance and Resources.
Donna Carlin, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services.
And Dominic O'Brien, Scrutiny Officer.
Great, thanks. So item 2 is apologies. We've had no apologies for absence this evening. We have had apologies for lateness from Councillor Gunesh. So hopefully she'll be joining us shortly. Item 3, urgent business. We don't have any new items of urgent business, do we? Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members of the committee have any declarations to make? No? Okay. So if people online could mute themselves, please. Thank you. Item 5 is deputations and questions. We haven't received anything under this item. No.
No, just to note though, Chair, that the deputation that we had at the last meeting from the Haringey Wheelchair Users Group, they have a number of deputations going to the various round of panels coming up this week. That was an action from the previous meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Thanks for that, Dominic. Okay, right. Item 6 then is minutes of scrutiny panel meetings. We haven't got any minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider tonight. We had a meeting on the 27th of November and that was on the budget. So we'll bring the minutes to the final budget meeting of the OSC on the 19th of January, along with the minutes from the budget scrutiny panel meetings. But we do have 2 sets of minutes to be noted from the joint meetings of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel and the Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel, which we haven't had here before. These meetings took place, one took place on the 28th of May 2024 and the other one on the 10th of June this year. Councillor Connor, did you have something to say about these minutes?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask that that the actions are then taken as they were for 2024 as sort of little bullet points at the end under recommendations, so that's easy for people to see what the recommendations were from the meetings. Otherwise you have to sort of go through the whole paper. But also then there's a tracker from the actions, because those actions were from June and it's now December, so we can't see what the outcome of those actions are. So if anyone's reading the papers or wants to know what's going on, they wouldn't be able to find out. So I was request really that in future we get sort of the recommendations clearly at the end, and then we also get a little tracker to say what's happening, so that when the person who chairs the next meeting, it's really easy for them to see where we're up to and what the results of the previous recommendations were. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Connor. That seems like a reasonable suggestion. So can we make sure that's taken forward in future? Thanks, Dominic. Okay, great. So we are noting these minutes, are we? Or we're not agreeing them? Yeah. They're just to be noted. So we'll note those minutes. And next item is item 7, which is the Q2 finance update, which went to Cabinet yesterday. We're going to consider this report, which is in the papers from pages 17 to 134. So we've got Councillor Carlin and Tara Neves, the Corporate Director of Finance and Resources here. So could you provide a brief introduction, please, and then we'll go to questions.
So this report provides an update for Q2 of the year 25-26. Although this update shows an overspend on the general fund of 23.4 million, what must be noted is the improved position from Q1, which is quite substantial. And of specific importance is the reduction in the overspend from adults and temporary accommodation. And as you know, those are the two areas where we were seeing the biggest overspend in terms of our budget. So both of those are very encouraging. We know that officers are working across the council to reduce spend wherever possible. We have spend control panels, we have very tight controls on staffing, etc. On agency workers, the numbers have come down really substantially. We've seen the largest drop in we manage our agency workers through a company called Matrix that works most boroughs in London, are contracted through Matrix, and we have seen over the past 6 months the largest drop in agency workers of any borough using the Matrix contract. So that's really has been encouraging. The housing revenue account, we've seen is a rising cost of repairs and disrepair cases to do with damp and mold. It's really important to put the resource in, because if those cases, the more cases they can close down as quickly as possible, the better. And the more cases of damp and mold, etc., that can be dealt with before they ever reach disrepair, the better as well. So there has been a lot of additional funding that's gone in there, and additional investment. And as we know, we're also talking about the major contracts. Our capital program is under constant review, and we challenge quite hard about whether we actually need to spend capital. It's important for us to continue to spend capital because those things are providing much needed infrastructure in the borough. But at the same time, we are constantly thinking, is this what we need to do? Do we need to do it now across the piece? And I'm constantly challenging across everything. Is this a nice to have, or is this something that we need to have, and how are we going to pay for it going forward? So our priority capital investments will continue, and especially where they save us revenue costs, because that's also important, is to continue where it's going to save us money in the future. However, we know where we are in Haringey, which is that in this report, because it goes up and down a bit, adults, children's and temporary accommodation is 72%. Earlier it was 80%. So it's around that ballpark figure. And as we know, that's, those are statutory services. And Graham, we want, we'll say, if a child needs a placement, that's going to cost us however many £100,000 a year. If that child needs that placement, then we have to pay for it. And similarly with adults, if people come to us and they need support, we have a duty, and we must provide that support. There is work also going on to look at if what was interesting in terms of recent analysis of deprivation across London based on the new guidelines from the government was that in Haringey we have high numbers of elderly people living in poverty, and we're very high in terms of the country where we're seeing it. We see children living in poverty, we're seeing elderly people, working age young adults not as much, and I think that's people moving in, etc., and the gentrification that we're seeing. But elderly people living in poverty, we have high numbers in Haringey. So that's the background to this report, but an encouraging and a more encouraging position. And there's other there are continue to be savings and pressure to improve income collection as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And we've talked a lot about some of the. Oh, sorry, Taryn, did you have something you wanted to add? No, when we talked a lot about the pressures on the budget and the structural issues we've got, and I suppose what we need to focus on tonight is the changes since we last saw the Q1 report. We've now got the Q2 report, and there are some quite significant changes there. I just wanted to note that we're still looking at a kind of gap between what's coming in and what's going out of around about £60 million, which amounts to adding, if that were all in the end to be funded from EFS, ultimately from borrowing, they were looking at adding another £3.7 million to our revenue budget for the next 20 years, and that's just from what's happening this year. It is good to see a positive movement, but just to break it down a little bit, and there's some very helpful tables in here that do that. Only 3.8 million of the 10.7 million positive movement is coming from the kind of the services. And obviously a lot of that can be dealt with by the relevant panels. We'll have some of that stuff comes under here tonight. There's like 1.7 million from corporate non-service budgets, but a lot of that's to do with like changes in interest rates and or not changes in interest rates, but the amount of interest that we're earning and on our investments and the amount of interest we're paying on our borrowing. What I think would be helpful, because there's a line here in the chart on page 26, which talks about external finance, and it's a positive movement of 5.2 million, which is quite significant. It's basically half of the overall positive movement. Could you just please expand a little bit on what that is for the benefit of people who might not be able to tell by reading the papers?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And as you've highlighted, and had Councillor Carlin said, there has been some improvements in those demand-led services, but kind of half of the improvement is largely down to kind of external financing, and to some extent some of the corporate budgets as well. And you quite rightly identified, essentially the interest that we receive on the balances, but also the interest that we pay, and that's on borrowing. That's largely down to reduced capital reduced capital spend compared to what we budgeted for. So that external financing line, 5.2 million, that is usually, there is a number of transactions that we would normally bring in at the year end, but I was quite keen that we had almost didn't do a half year close, so to speak, of the account, but actually where we knew that there was some positive movement. So we created a more realistic forecast rather than it all coming out at the year end, which maybe we have done in recent years. So that external financing probably would have come out at the year end, but I thought it's really important to bring it out at Q2. That's largely around our collection fund, which is essentially our council tax and our business rates, and this is a previous year's surplus. So essentially a bit like the HRA, the collection fund is a separate ring-fenced account for just council tax and business rates. It can either be in surplus or it can also be in deficit, and there has probably been years when it's been in deficit. We have had an accumulated surplus that we have had from previous years, and there are two options essentially, and kind of previous roles I have done both. You can either place that into a reserve and hold it for maybe when you have a year that maybe collection isn't so positive and maybe in the deficit, or you can bring it into the revenue position, which is what we are doing here. Now, if we weren't, given that we are in EFS territory and we are already, kind of forecast to need at least 37 million, actually it was more appropriate that we did it as much as we possibly can to bring down that in-year overspend rather than to put that in reserve for so-called a rainy day. And I know, we've reported actually for the first time in this report as well around collection rates, which we have had a slight dip over the year, but we certainly, and we can cover that when we get to it, we are seeing an improvement as we go through the year. So I can't sit here and say that in my head, that 5.2 million we need to consider as a one-off. It's a one-off benefit in year. I can't at this stage say that that would always be available every year. It wouldn't be something that we would budget for. It is just essentially a windfall in the year, but it can quite easily be in deficit as well, in which case we would need to find the funding to fund the deficit as well. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that provides some clarity. Sorry, Councillor Carlin.
Not exactly on this point, but on the point that I raised previously and where we are here, I think the difference and why I'm finding Q2 reassuring and why I'm quite positive about it is because since I became finance lead, what we saw was position in things like adults or temporary accommodation continue to deteriorate the whole year. So we had a position we would have a position in Q1, and the position in Q2 would be at the same or worse, and the position in Q3 would be the same or worse, and the position in Q4 would be the same or worse. And it was a constantly deteriorating position. So that's why, to me, it's really important that even though we have small gains and small improvements, these are still improvements. That means that these services, the demand and the pressures on these services haven't continued to go up as we go through the year. And that is it's kind of a stabilization, and some of that stabilization is because of coming out of last year where we saw things still going up towards the end of the year, but we didn't reflect it until Q1. So that's the reason that I found it encouraging.
Thanks for that. And I suppose all I wanted to highlight was we do focus a lot on kind of like savings in directorates and attempts to reduce overspends in directorates, but some of the bigger changes that we're seeing here are in other areas, and some of these things that we're doing, they it's good to see positive movement, but it's still we've got all these additional spend control measures, for instance, and it's great that that's happened and it's resulted in a £1 million improvement roundabout overall. But when we're looking at a £60 million gap, it's only small. So really, it was just to highlight that and to say and some of the bigger changes to do with some of the other stuff going on in finance that are to do with borrowing and investments and what Taryn was speaking about earlier.
Just come back briefly on that point. So I think it's around just under 80%. It fluctuates around the 80%. It's really focused our spend around adults, children, and temporary accommodation when we look at it. So, if we're really going to move towards a position, we have statutory responsibilities absolutely in those areas. But as you say, with a financial position that is so challenging, it is almost impossible not to look at how we can meet our statutory responsibilities to continue to deliver really good outcomes, support the most vulnerable, but met perhaps in a different way. And that's where the kind of longer term financial planning absolutely needs to come in. Because as you say, I mean, some of these are, particularly the external financing one is a one-off. So, to get to a more sustainable position, that is where we need to be looking. Thanks.
That's great. Right, I'm going to invite questions now on the first part of the report. So that's up to page 39 before the appendices. So Councillor Connor.
Hi, and this just might be clarification really, Taryn, but in the report, we were just talking about this earlier on page 24 at 6.3. So just previously you've been saying about the improvement, which was great, but then you said the improvement's been offset. There's an unbudgeted need for an additional bad debt provision, and you mentioned a £3.9 million. So I went a little bit further at 6.5, and I wasn't sure if this bad debt provision was parking, which we come up to later, but that's a different figure in the paper, or if it's at 6.5, which is the where we've been paying housing benefit, because I couldn't work out from the paper how much we've been overpaying. You said it's an improved position by 775,000. And then you said we're hoping to claim an extra 1.56 million for overpayments created in 24-25. So two questions. One is what is this bad debt of 3.9, this unbudgeted one? Is this to do with the overpayments? And the second question is, on the overpayments, how long have we been overpaying for? Is this just something that happened in 2024 and there was an administration error and that's now been resolved? Or has this been going on for longer? And if so, how much have we overpaid over the years by? Or, so how much have we sort of lost as council? Thanks.
I think we need to come back on the specific the specifics exactly. Council's tax is in my remit, but not housing benefit for me to answer that exactly for you. So we'll give you a written answer on that. How it works generally is that the government recognises that we administer housing benefit on behalf of government. It's not our money, but so we administer it on behalf of the government, and there are two things that happen. First of all, there's an acknowledgement that there'll be a certain number of overpayments that are because of delay or because of an official error, or you didn't ask for the right information, or and what they do is they spot check, and if they find more than a certain number just in terms of spot checking, then they say all the overpayments, you know, they reduce what they'll give you in terms of overpayments. And so that's one of the reasons. We then have also housing benefit, which is not exactly to do with this, but we have the big problem of supported accommodation, where we don't get the amount of money that we have to pay out. So it's another one of these things where we're administrating on behalf of the government, but actually they don't give us all the money. And so if somebody is in
I think we went through this last time.
yeah, so there's that as well. But we'll get you an exact the exact details on the actual figures of it. But as you can see, what the paragraph says, that we've been in negotiation with the DWP in terms of historic overpayments, and the DWP has agreed that in actual fact we should be able to claim a further 1.56 million.
The claim is about how much. Sorry. The question is a request for information about exactly how much historically and how long it's been going on for. So if we could get that as a written. Oh, Taryn, sorry.
I can just come in on, sorry, the housing benefit one, and then I'll come back to, because they're actually two very different issues. Yeah. Yes. So we'll come back with so it does relate to historic years as well. So let us come back to you with a written response on almost the total amount of overpayments, the different categories that they relate to, and kind of as Councillor Carlin has just said, around also universal credit, and we can show you that breakdown. A large element of it is around supported exempt accommodation, where essentially there was an overpayment of housing benefit historically, and it's very difficult with any debt actually over a period of time to reclaim that. We have spent a lot of time, and I think it's kind of come across both the work of the team, and we also I think we also had this question when we talked about the budget as well, not about two weeks ago, when Greg Osborne, who's the head of Rebs and Bens, was here to explain. We've done a lot of work of really trying to unpick those historic essentially the debt that we've got about what is really recoverable and what is not. And therefore, you will recall, particularly, I think it started in 24-25 outturn, we started to see the pressure on housing benefit that probably hadn't been reported in previous years. It has been there, but it's only the last probably 18 months, 2 years that we've been getting under the detail of that and a true reflection around what the debt can be covered. What I would say, and this is actually live off the press, when the report was published 10 days ago, we hadn't yet heard around whether we could reclaim or whether we would receive that additional funding. That money has been received. It has been confirmed. It is a one-off though. So, I mean, I think, as more and more residents are moving across to universal credit, the issue around overpayments will almost be very minimal compared to the administration of housing benefit in the way that it has done. But we're in a much, much better position with housing benefit. We will probably still be reporting on housing benefit, I would have thought, for another 12 months until we've completely resolved all of those issues. But what we're trying to do is get a really good handle on what the bad debts provision should be and what we won't be able to recuperate. In terms of so that is housing benefit. That's very different to the paragraph above in the report, Councillor Connor, that you were referring to, which is around so paragraph 6.3, you referred to it, and you also referred, I think, possibly to a couple of other parts in the report. One is around the write-offs, so the appendices on write-offs, and I'll just explain the difference, and then we might want to delve into the detail when we get to that particular appendix. But it also may be showing in the environment and residence experience appendix as well. So again, this possibly is one that we would normally do at the year end, look at with the debt that we hold, all debt across all services, when we set the budget and at the end of the year, we have to make a provision of how much of that we think we can recover, and therefore the element that we can't recover, we have to make a provision in the account. It's like an accounting entry that we have to, but it essentially hits the bottom line. It's called a bad debts provision. It's not real money, I should say, until it gets written off. But rather than doing that as part of the year-end exercise, I was really keen that we did that at Q2 to have a look at an indication of where that stands. We've done that across all services. I would say we've probably got even more work to do over the final quarter, but I was really keen anything that we did know that we brought out as part of Q2. So, for instance, some of the adults, we have looked at the bad debts provision. We know we've got high levels of debt in adult social care. We've done that same exercise, and that's shown in adults. The 3.9 that you are seeing in 6.3 is an increase in the bad debts provision that we have estimated, and it's still a forecast. We will do the final calculation at the year end for parking. So it does, and you can see that within the environment and resident experience. So it might be something that we want to particular panel might want to delve into in a bit more detail in relation to parking. It's an increase in the bad debts provision. That is not the total bad debts provision for parking. The increase would actually stand at around about 6 million. Now that is a bad debts provision. I think, Councillor Connor, the other figure that you are referring to in the report is the write-offs, of which I think I think it's about 4.7 million off the top of my head, of which we say that 81% of that relates to parking. That is different to the 3.9. I know they're very similar figures, and that I promise that is coincidence rather than anything else. So let me just briefly explain without getting too technical the difference. So the write-offs is actual debt that we've written off. So that's real, I suppose. So we're saying that we analyse the debts every quarter, and for those that we know that we've exhausted every option to recover that debt, we write them off. So they are actual written off debt. So that is the 4.7 million that is referred to in Appendix 9, I think it is the write-off, of which 81% is parking, which is not dissimilar to 3.9. The 3.9 being referred to in paragraph 6.3 is the increase in the bad debts provision. So that's not an amount we've written off. That's just saying of the amount of parking debt that we have remaining, actually we have done an estimate on what we think we can recover very historically and what we may not be able to recover. So some of this debt will go back a number of years. It can go back up to 7 years. And that's where we've said on the remaining debt, we forecast that we would want to increase in a prudent position, increase the bad debts provision for 3.9. So it's almost an accounting transaction, whereas the write-off is the actual, we're actually writing off that debt. Does that make sense? Try not to get too technical, but there is a distinct difference.
Well, do you want to come back? Because I've just got a couple of clarification questions. One is. So you're saying, obviously, you're drawing the distinction between what's in the write-offs section of the report and the bad debt provision. However, I know you said that the bad debt provision is largely or entirely for parking debt.
So every service will have every service that collects income will have a bad debts provision based on the amount of the amount of income that we think we can collect.
Okay, right. No, it's just what I noted was that the 3.9 million is reflected by the same 3.9 million under parking in the write-offs, which was what kind of led to the confusion, I think.
That is pure coincidence. They are two very, very different elements. Look, on the bad debts provision, we review that regularly. So that's our best forecast at the moment. We may have a more optimistic outlook when we get to the year end or in future years. It is an accounting transaction of a provision that we need to allow.
So my second clarification question was, you say it's an increase in the bad debt provision. So is that an error in the table then, that the revised 2025-26 budget for that bit is blank, whereas there should be a figure in there?
So bad debts provision is usually, it would be within the services, so the top half of the table. However, because it is work that is, so that's where the budget would sit. However, because it is very much still work in progress, I have held it corporately whilst we complete that remaining work over the over the last half of the year, essentially. But there will be bad debts provision budgets within adults, less so children's, every service that collects income and therefore could have a potential debt would and should have an accurate budget for bad debts provision based on what we think we can collect.
Oh, I think I understand now. It just looks like there's no provision for bad debt in the original budget, but that's not the case. They're within the service.
Yeah, it will be in the service, and the reason that I wanted to show it corporately, or when I say corporately, sorry, in the bottom half of the table, is because it's still very much work in progress. So I wanted to be transparent because it's a significant number that would affect our end of year outturn, but there is still work to do within all services. Actually, like I say, we've got a much better handle on how much, so there's fewer surprises, shall we say, at the year end, but we will absolutely need to continue to do the work, not just on parking, across all services, around whether that bad debts provision is accurate. And the reason, it's a provision rather than an actual, so we will probably never get it exactly right. It's based on a methodology, almost the older the debt, the less likely you're going to recover it. So it's based on a bit of a formula basis. It's really important that we try to get that as accurate as possible when we report it, because it would also be looked at as part of the external audit process.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Connor, you wanted to come back on this? I can see Councillor Small.
So I'm going to acquiesce to Councillor Small, but I just wanted to say, we're talking about this bad debt provision across all services. So in adults and health, where in the papers do we get the bad debt provision estimates in this way for our individual areas? Because I'm trying to think, and I just don't know if I'm having a brain freeze here, but I'm not sure quite where we've seen that. Thanks. And then, yeah, thanks. That's it.
So we don't report that level of detail in any report, so we can certainly pull together a written response to you for you in terms of, you know, individual services about, you know, what is their current budget for bad debts provision. That's fine. We just wouldn't necessarily report on that level of detail. The reason that I thought it was important to show this is because of the significance of the number where you would normally see it. So if we take let's take adults as an example, and this is just this is not a realistic example, but hopefully it kind of puts it into context of how we do it. If as part of Q2 or Q3 or the end of the year that we increase the bad debts provision in a particular service, actually that impacts on the forecast and it impacts on the variation. So where you would see it within this report is in the narrative. So when we're explaining why we're off of budget, if one of the reasons is because we've had to increase the bad debts provision compared to what we had for the budget by a significant sum, i.e. over, then you would see it in the narrative. We wouldn't necessarily, I mean, you know, all of our services are made up of hundreds of individual budget lines. So you would never see it in the sort of report, but we can certainly, you know, if it's an area of interest, then we can certainly pull it out and kind of do a written response to you on
It's
the
only
back of
because
this
I've
discussion.
never seen it, so I just don't know if you're talking about 500,000 or 4 million. So that's why I was asking. But anyway, that I'm fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Torin, because part of my question has been answered. What I'm not quite sure I understand is the gap between us budgeting a bad debt and moving it into the write-off category. I don't understand at which point it crosses the line, and that relates to the second point, which is you mentioned around when we're audited, they will assess this, and there's an element of honesty and transparency that we need to take. But likewise, the 3.9 million now as an additional pressure in our current budget situation, if I'm understanding rightly, is 4 million quid of extra EFS and therefore 250k worth of interest every year. I'm trying to work out how, considering we usually assume that all debt is recoverable until it moves into the write-off category, why we might put a section of debt as a pressure which is going to cost us interest rather than just waiting until we move it into the write-off category and then moving forward.
Okay, I'll attempt to. So a provision is an estimate, I suppose, of what we think we may not be able to recover, and we have to do that for accounting purposes. You know, that then therefore gives a true reflection. So we do that when we kind of set the budget, and then we do it again at outturn. If you have got your bad debts provision correct, when you do the write-off, it's no additional pressure hitting the bottom line because you're essentially drawing down from the provision that is already within your budget or kind of as factored into your budget. So they are linked, but you know, almost where's the line? It's almost one of the same process in the sense that we would want to have an adequate provision so that when we have exhausted all opportunities, so we set a provision, then we exhaust all opportunities to recover that debt. If at the end of that we feel that we can't and we've exhausted and I have to challenge each and every write-off, it's subject to my approval and over 50,000 subject to Councillor Carlin's approval, and we choose to write off in the 4.7 million that you are seeing, there is already a provision to write it off. So that 4.7 million is not impacting on the bottom line because you've already got the provision to write off against. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but in the current context we're in, then it means we're going to be borrowing that money in order before we write it, because we're assuming it's definitely coming anyway, and so we need to borrow in order to cover ourselves and to have the balanced budget.
In a way, that's how the budget works. So when you know that there's a pressure coming in and you see that pressure then you have no option but to put that money into your budget. for the following year, for example. In the end, that pressure that you saw in the previous year, it may not be as much as you need in the budget. But once you know that you may need it, then Taran, because she knows that you may need it, then she has a responsibility to put it in the budget. And I completely agree that that can mean, and we see it, for example, with capital. If we think we're going to spend that amount of money, we put it in and we put the revenue cost of that in. If we think that we're going to borrow X amount of money, we have to put the revenue cost in. And if we don't borrow it, we've already put that in our budget and we may have, so it is that, but that's just the way the budget works. If you think that you're going to need that money, then Taran, as the 151, has to put that money in, even if in the end you don't need it. That's what you have to do. You have to cater for it.
So I
I
suppose
completely take your point, and that is a frustration, and that's why what we're trying to do is to ensure that, for example, with capital, that we only put the amount of capital into our budget that we know we're going to spend. Because if we're putting in what used to happen when I became the finance lead, and borrowing costs were much lower. Well, they were going up, but what had historically happened was that there would be capital lines in the budget that were just put there just in case, and the borrowing costs of that had to go in as well. So it was, but now it's much. We're trying to be an office that are trying to be as tight as
if
possible.
I could just interrupt, sorry, because I think there is a difference between putting a line in the budget and saying these are going to be the borrowing costs and actually borrowing the money and actually paying the money. So I suppose what it comes down to in your question, Councillor Small, is does doing it this way rather than the other potential way that was suggested actually make any difference to when we borrow the money that's needed and the amount of interest that's paid or not? Because surely, as you've said before, Tarin, we only borrow the money when we need it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is accounting practice. It probably feels a little bit back to front in the sense that, well, I think where you're coming from, Councillor Small, is rather than putting the provision in, do we not wait until we've written off, don't have the provision and it hits the bottom line then? Unfortunately, as Councillor, both budgeting and accounting practice says that actually we need to make a prudent provision. Now, when we had times before exceptional financial support, that maybe wasn't so much of an issue, but I can kind of see why it feels a little bit kind of back to front at the moment. I would, however, echo what Councillor White says, is that, we are budgeting for exceptional financial support. We're forecasting how much that we need, and we need to do that to be able to both set the budget and close the accounts. But we, even right across our capital programme, we won't borrow until we absolutely have to. And we will do that in a very timely way, in the sense that, there are times in the year when we have quite low reserves and quite low balances. So we don't have significant sums, constantly through the year to invest and benefit from the interest receivable. But there are definitely times in the year when perhaps all the grants come in one go, and therefore, the expenditure isn't going out at the same time. So we wouldn't borrow. So we absolutely don't borrow until we need to. And that is why you are seeing on the Treasury management charges, you're seeing that movement of 3.4 or 3.5 million. That is both a combination of where we've had higher balances than we thought to invest in the year, and we've got a slightly higher interest rate, but also therefore that we also haven't had to borrow until probably the latter part of the year. So whereas actually our budget would have been set on the assumption that we have to borrow throughout the whole year. So it's a particularly setting the budget in those, it's very much a judgment call. I mean, capital, that is one area where we're really pushing hard to get a much more accurate profile of the spending, so that we can then do a more accurate budget of how much we really need to borrow against that. But it's a bit of a balancing act. But I do get your point around, the bad debts provision and potentially having to budget and forecast for borrowing that we may not need to do.
Thanks. I actually had a question that was kind of linked to that down here, which was on paragraph 6.28, where it mentions about the £2.91 million of capital financing costs, which is the full cost of borrowing 37 million plus 10 million that's already borrowed for the last financial year, 37 million that's expected for this year, but that's the full cost of paying the interest over the year. And you're saying we only borrow it when we need it. So surely we haven't borrowed it yet, and we're already, way over halfway through the year. So why are we budgeting for the full cost of interest over the whole year?
So I mean, it's halfway through the year, so this is the Q2 position. So at the moment, what we're saying is the forecast assumes that it may well change at the year end, but the prudent assumption is to say that that full 37 million may need to be borrowed at some point during the latter part of the year, and therefore the forecast includes that what is estimated at 2.91 million.
But surely, if we've not borrowed it yet, then we're not going to be paying interest for the whole of this year. The interest is only payable from the moment when you borrow it, surely. So why is the 6% interest, 6.2% interest payable for the full year?
But I hope I haven't said that we haven't borrowed yet in the year, because we have borrowed in the year. We may not be fully borrowed for the whole. So this is the difference between budget and forecast. Our budget will assume that we fully borrow for the capital program or the borrowing element. The budget assumes full borrowing for the year and for EFS for the year, and then that's what the budget will represent. The actuals, when we get to the year end, is we may not have borrowed for the whole year. We may have taken out that borrowing partway through the year. So at the moment, it probably is quite a prudent forecast, because that is only at Q2. There will be, and I can say, because I agree the borrowing, there is some borrowing that has taken place in years. So I didn't want to lead you to believe that there's been no borrowing. It's just that we haven't borrowed the full amount for the full EFS and the full capital programme from the very start of the year. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So just to clarify, what Taran's saying is that will then get mopped up at the outturn at the end of year, where we will actually then be able to say exactly how much we did borrow and how much interest we paid, and that will get mopped up with the outturn report for this financial year, which
Understood.
obviously, as you know, comes into the next
Understood.
next financial year.
Thank you. So just to welcome Councillor Gunesh, and just to say we're looking at the we're on the Q2 finance report, and we're just looking at the kind of the introductory. We're not doing the appendices as yet. So it's questions on the report up to page 39. So right, see Councillor Connor and then Councillor Small.
Thank you. So I had a question on page 27 on table 3, where it says total savings and management delivery actions delivery. And if I'm reading this correctly, we've got the year-to-date saving delivery of just 5.2 million. But the projected full in-year savings is 22, and we've got an green of 15.9. So it looks like nearly 60 million pounds is definitely saved. But we've actually to date only made 5.2 million pounds worth of savings. So how do we square that circle with that figure there and then the 15 that looks like we've definitely saved that amount? So I'm just sort of checking on how that works. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, look, you picked up a really important key message, I think, from this table, and I think it may be the first quarter that we've reported the year-to-date savings column. I need to go back and check on Q1. So that does look typically very low compared to what we are forecasting, the 22.9 million. The 5.3 million is what it's actually been. So you can actually see that it's come out of you know, you can see the reduction on the budget. The green, amber, red is more of a forecast in terms of, you know, the 15.9 million is those that we are forecast, or sorry, I say we, it's the royal we, it's all officers, not just myself and Councillor Carlin. It's where, you know, all officers across all the services that do have the savings feel that by the end of the year that they can get to about, just as you say, just 16 million, which will be achieved. The 1.6 amber is at risk. I think we need to be honest about that. You know, we would ideally like to turn them to green, but there is also a risk that they may not be delivered. And then you can see there the 11.7, largely driven, not exclusively by some of the cross-cutting savings, are those that we are saying they won't be delivered in full for 25-26. So there is, you know, I was going to say in the introduction, you know, delivery, that some of our, one of the drivers of our overspend is the non-delivery of our savings. And we have recognised that as a group of officers, that isn't where we want to be. That is an area that was within our control, within our gift. They are savings that we said that we can be delivered. When you look at the year-to-date figure, doesn't give much assurance that it can. And I can sit here and say, well, there's still 6 months remaining of the year, but that's quite a tall order. So we are taking the quarter 2 position, and that's absolutely our priority, to focus on existing savings. And I don't want to necessarily talk about the budget because we spoke about that quite extensively, next year's budget, a couple of weeks ago, but that is one of the reasons why we haven't put significant amounts of new savings forward as part of next year's budget, because it is really important that we focus ourselves on that 29 million that we need to deliver in the current year. And, you know, that is the focus of officers. We are getting much more into the detail around key milestones, the key changes that need to be made, because at the moment we haven't got the assurance based on the actual savings today that we are on track to deliver that. So I think there is certainly an element of risk in terms of that, and those RAG ratings are subjective, they are self-RAG ratings. So we are doing quite extensive work to really understand the true position, because you know, our focus should be on trying to increase the number of greens. So, you know, build on that 5.3 million and try and get as close as possible to the 29.3 million that needs to be delivered, because that will improve. That is a way to, I would hope, that is a way to improve our end of year forecast when we get there as well. We may not be able to do anything specifically about demand, etc., but actually, if we can focus our time and attention over the last part of the year on the delivery of savings, that will certainly improve our position and reduce our requirement on exceptional financial support.
Thank you. I'm very happy for this to be a much shorter answer, because I know of time and getting councillors' questions in. But I just also wanted to ask, you've got, and we won't go into details, but on Appendix 10, you've got a lot of different methods of how you're going to tighten up the process in order to get this. Is there an area that you're still concerned about within this process, that where you're feeling that the grip isn't as tight as you would still like it to be? I know you've spoken at quite some length on the previous answer about that. So I'm just literally now looking for, is there an area that you're particularly looking to focus in on to improve the grip in this area? Thanks.
It can be a very short answer. It's the cross-cutting ones, and I think there's quite a detailed explanation in the report around where we are. So those are the ones that really concern me, because they're cross-council ones. If you look at the services, you know, the delivery is much stronger. It's the cross-council ones.
Was yours on the savings section, or because I just had a comment and a question on the savings section. Just off the back of what Councillor Connor was saying, it just seems, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but, and I know this is this isn't a question that this is obviously a question that Councillor Small would maybe want to put to the service. But just in terms of how it's profiled on the page, if you're looking at the second line there, where in housing demand, we're looking to make £3.5 million worth of savings, 101,000 has been made so far. But this is a service which is spending money across the year, and we're now in month 7 or 8 or 9 of the year of the year. Surely it's now not feasible that it. Are you, as the finance director, as satisfied? Have you got the right assurances from officers in those departments that we're going to deliver that full saving over in back loaded right at the end of the year, because it somehow doesn't seem feasible in a service like that.
And I'm speaking kind of as a section 151, actually housing demand, it might be one, Councillor Small, that you want to explore with officers at the scrutiny committee, as scrutiny panel, sorry. Housing demand is probably one of the areas that keeps me less awake at night, can I say, in the sense that they have got an awful lot of initiatives underway. So,
but I don't really want to ask the question about housing demand specifically.
Okay.
It's about how this is being presented here and whether it's feasible that and what are the assurances you're getting from the relevant areas of service delivery, that when they're saying, yeah, we're gonna save £3.5 million over the year, but they've only delivered 100,000 so far, that they're still going to be able to make that, even though that this money is going out, it's being paid to providers in the private sector on a daily basis.
yeah, so I'm in a fortunate position that I see the in-month positions as well, and I don't want to quote any figures, but I do know that housing demand is going in the right direction and at quite a significant sum. So I have got some assurance. This is a position in the actuals at Q2, but I have got the assurance that the initiatives that they put in place are having an impact. Now, this is about 3.4 million of savings. This is not about alleviating their overspend altogether. And I think there's a really important distinction to make between the two. Look, we will do some further due diligence on the savings, but certainly the trajectory that I'm seeing and the acquisitions that I'm seeing. So I don't want to get into detail, Councillor White, that's for the panel. But actually what I'm seeing, the acquisitions that are coming through, the trend in the data, I probably need to do some more due diligence on whether the full 3.4 million can be achieved in year. Some of it will also be through one-off mitigations. So if not all of the saving comes to fruition in 1 year around, the TA acquisitions, the work with the private sector landlords, actually what the service is committed to is identifying those one-off mitigations, and then we'll get the full year effect in 26, 27. It is a really fair challenge. Like I say, I think there is quite a bit of further due diligence and assurance that we need to continue doing through the remainder of the year to make sure that we're reporting on a realistic RAG rating.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. And thanks for that, Councillor Small.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to start something really positive, and I wanted to also add in at that point that I think, I obviously don't speak for the scrutiny panel or anything, but that it's clear of how much hard work is going into trying to steady the ship in very, very, very difficult waters, and I wanted to note that because it comes across that trying to do everything possible to protect services and so on. Of which, so I was going to start with the optimistic one around. I had a question around the agency staff and that reduction. I'm glad Councillor Carlin explained that, because I thought that was a huge reduction of 10 million, but also that we're down to 22.7 million. And so I was wanting to get your view on the picture of moving forward. How much more juice is there to squeeze from that, or actually have we really maximised it and now we're starting to level out moving forward on savings throughout the rest of the year?
We're still working on agency workers, and all the directors have targets to meet. There are certain sectors where it's more difficult than others because there's difficulty in recruiting in specific areas. But the huge sea change when we first started working on this was because of the contract came needing a huge extension of tens of millions of pounds. And the feeling around officers at the time was there's nothing we can do. This is agency workers. But just pushing down and making sure that that every single agency worker, what would happen is somebody would come in as agency, everyone would forget they were agency. And suddenly, like 6 years later, they'd still be working for us as an agency worker, maybe even having moved around teams. Nobody would actually remember that person came in as an agency worker. So there is still work that we can do to, because it's things like growing our own. So actually training people up, keeping them, always be a certain number in children's, for example. That doesn't actually cost us that much because there's a London, certainly a North London wide agreement that we won't nobody will pay more than a certain amount. So but there is certainly more that can be done. What I'm very pleased about is when we started, we were an outlier in London. We had way more agency workers, and now in actual fact we're below the average. So the work's been worth it, but it is something that you have to watch all the time. That's what everybody says. It's a bit like whack-a-mole. If you don't, if you're not watching it all the time, then because the easiest thing to do is to hire an agency worker. But the other reason why it's pushing down is because if anybody wants to hire an agency worker, they have to get past Taran. And that's not easy. So it's a combination of looking at the current agency workers and really challenging whether we need them, but also then in terms of recruitment, do we absolutely need somebody? So it used to be automatic that if somebody left while you're waiting to recruit, you'd automatically bring in agency. Can you hold that vacancy while you recruit? Instead of, there's some you can't, but there's some that you can. It's how you balance that.
And I just add briefly to that, because there will always be some need for agency, and I think we need to recognise that, but not at the levels that we do have. Dana's mentioned that we have a recruitment panel that meets once a fortnight. It's not just myself, it's others as well, quite a senior level. And that's been in place for about at least 18 months. It was in place before I started here, but actually the control gets tighter. So with all of the controls that we have in place, unless we start to see a sea change, which we have, but we still feel that there is more to go on agency. So we have tightened that control. So it is much, much more difficult to get new agency members of staff that are non-essential, and we have a criteria for non-essential, or perhaps they're income generating, so the particular role might generate income. So it's the roles that don't support an improvement in the financial position. I mean, the only thing I would say is we're all under intense scrutiny on our agency. I'm one of the higher ones in terms of finance and resources. So we've all committed to, for me, I've got some pending restructures, I've got agency in, but it's really important, and Councillor Carlin holds us all to account about having that plan. So you may not be able to turn off the dial immediately, but actually being able to demonstrate that we've got a plan to reduce our agency over not a very long period of time, but quite a short period of time.
Thank you both very much. On a different issue, just want to talk about the capital expenditure and the gaps there. So, as I understand it, and forgive me if I've misunderstood, there's about 10%. We're about 90% of our budgeted spending on the capital projects, and so the HRA and the general fund are 89% and 83% something. But in terms of the money that's saving us, is that the 2 million in the Q2 on the tax savings on capital financing charges? So my first question is to try to understand how those gaps in the capital programs are alleviating pressures on borrowing. The second question related to that is because that's about 10% of capital financing charges saved, and so is there a strategy, or are you considering moving to a place where we change our capital program over the next few years as a way of mitigating in-year pressures on the capital financing charges? Because at the minute it feels a bit like luck or circumstance based on delayed projects, and considering it's 10% of the capital financing charges and about 2 million, actually, is there a plan to move into strategy to reduce those pressures?
So there's a couple of things that, and I'll try and keep the answer short. So in terms of the 2 million of the, so let me say about the capital program first, and then I'll come back to the 2 million capital financing because they are linked, but there is a slight difference. So so it is showing a kind of an underspend on the capital program, which of course, if that underspend, so our capital program is funded by, could be external grants, it could be external funding, but there is a large element that's borrowing. If that underspend is assumed to be funded by borrowing, then yes, it would feed up into, but it would feed up into that treasury management charges line, not the capital financing. So I'll come on to capital financing in just a second. So that's feeding into the 3.4 million underspend on the treasury management. So that's where that's feeding in. But that treasury management line is a combination of things. It's not just about borrowing costs. And, you know, maybe going forward, actually, we should separate interest receivable and interest payable. So it's really clear. So I'll take that back as a comment. On the capital programme, so I think you're looking at, so if I draw your attention to page 35 on table 5, so although it is showing, well, actually it's showing a fairly positive position in that on the general fund, the underspend is 19.2 million. And on the HRA, slightly more, but it's a much larger programme of 79 million. That is based on the current budget. Now, if you go back, and I think, Councillor Small, I do apologise because I think you gave me this as an action from Q1. What would be ideal for you to see is what the starting budget was when we set the budget in March. And I think that was the column that I was supposed to put in. So apologies, because actually although 20 million, actually I would love to be in a position where 20 million was the only underspend on a capital programme of that size. The starting budget when we set the budget for the capital programme, when it was agreed by Council Much, I think was about 240. But we made those adjustments at Q1 to get to it. And it's the nature of capital, but I think what it is not showing you is that complete transparency. What you want to see is how it started off in March compared to how it is now, because then you see a much larger underspend, which then you can kind of relate back to the bigger underspend on the treasury management. Does that make sense? So you're probably thinking, well, actually the scale of the underspend doesn't really align with the scale of the kind of the benefit on the treasury management. That's because you're only seeing the underspend in this quarter. So I will take that away, but hopefully that makes sense. But it is feeding into that underspend on the treasury management, but at a much larger scale. But I'll come on to capital financing because that's a slightly different explanation.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask around the moving into a sort of, is there a strategy or for you here around the borrowing costs and these components?
Yeah, so borrowing is always our last resort. So a couple of things that look, part of our financial sustainability, and if you look in the Appendix 10, the Finance Recovery Plan, is trying to keep our capital programme to the minimum as possible. So, you know, we will always need some capital investment, health and safety, routine maintenance, etc. But it is trying to really limit the amount of new capital investment, and particularly that's funded by borrowing. So we have done that review over the summer, and some of the changes you saw when we brought the budget proposals of schemes that could come out. Well, once we've got a programme, then we will look at the best way to fund that programme. So we will exhaust our grant, we will exhaust our external funding, could be strategic seal, and we will look at all of those. The residual is in the borrowing element. So what we're trying to do is to keep that as minimum as, we're trying to keep the any new borrowing minimum as possible. So an ideal scenario is no new borrowing. The reality of that is quite difficult because we will always have health and safety, we'll always have roads, we'll always have schools, etc. But it's, for me, what we're trying to do is keep that to a minimum, and that's what we've done as part of the review that's happened over the summer. So that, I think there's probably more further we can go, and we will keep going around that loop each year to make sure that we have got a programme that is as affordable as we possibly can be, but also it's deliverable. You know, I don't want us to be in a position where we'll always have some slippage because it's the nature of the capital, but I don't want us to be in a position where we've got slippage of 60, 70 million each year. And I think we've improved quite significantly this year, but I think there is still a place for us to go. Can I just briefly explain the capital financing, because that is slightly different. So all of what I've just talked about, if you go back to that table, feeds into the treasury management. The treasury management line, treasury management charges, the 2 million on capital financing. And again, this could be seen as an accounting transaction. So when we on our capital program, we don't just have to budget for the borrowing costs, we also have to budget for minimum revenue provision. It's a difference between an endowment mortgage and a repayment mortgage. You know, essentially, if you're just paying the interest off, it's an endowment mortgage. If you're paying off repayment, then you have to pay off the balance. In accounting terms, we have to allow for that repayment type element. And so that is what capital financing charges is. It's an accounting transaction that we need to budget for, but it's not essentially real money going out the door, if that makes sense. So we reviewed our policy. We reviewed it as part of the budget in March when we took it through full council, and we updated our policy. And what that brought us is a 2 million benefit compared to what we've been budgeted for. We knew it when we set the budget in March. However, because the policy hadn't been agreed, because it was being agreed as part of the budget pack, we couldn't build it into the budget, and therefore we were going to bring it out in Q1, but we decided we'd bring it out in Q2. So I've always known that 2 million would be there. So yeah, so it's slightly different. It's more of an accounting issue.
Thanks. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick clarification on basically the savings that are obviously on track or plan to we want to achieve in this quarter. If they're not achieved, do they automatically go into the third quarter and effectively then impact on the future, like next year's funding, and what would be the impact of it on the next year's funding? So that's my kind of really first quick question of some clarity. Secondly, I wanted to ask a question on asset management. I mean, obviously, that's an area that we need to, as a council, utilize and make the most of, you know, like generating income, and I welcome that. But I'm just like, obviously, another part of the report, risk and issues, clearly also highlighting that some of these plans, it's subject to external factors. Like, for example, we want to charge businesses better rates and, you know, generate income, and all our spaces that we are hiring, increase the rent and make sure that it's, you know, reasonable market rent. But then if those businesses or those charities, those people are not able to pay, then that's really not gonna help us. So I just wanted to, like, what's our kind of first of all, how do we anticipate the external factors to somehow impact that as well? My last question is, I think from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, on quarter one, we had basically overspent in key areas. I mean, adults, children, and temporary accommodation, and so on. The big areas that use lots of resources. But obviously one of the reasons at that time that was given to us was that the budget that was set up at that time, even though it was prudent, it was sort of conservative, but there wasn't much, like, it was still not enough against the market rating and inflation and all those things. So I just wanted to, like, how are we doing in that respect? I'll just leave those for now. Thanks.
So in terms of on the savings table, the RAG ratings are the forecast of where we think we'll be at the year end. So we update each quarter the forecast, but that's where we think we will get to at the year end position. Next year, as part of the work that we did over the summer, there was a couple of savings that we identified in the current year that just can't be delivered long term. And they were particularly within some of our corporate services around income generation and advertising. So we, as part of the budget report that you saw a couple of weeks ago, we have written them out for future years, but there were very few and far between. I think they amounted to about 500,000. The budget for next year and the budget gap that you saw a couple of weeks ago assumes that all the 25-26 savings, apart from those ones that we've written off, will be delivered in full. So actually the table that you look at here, some of our savings are being achieved in the current year, and I've got some in my own area. I can't achieve the actual saving in full in year, so I'm identifying one-off mitigations in the current year with the expectation that I will deliver in full for next year. So that's a big risk. And I won't get into budget conversation, but that's where I need to make an assumption around what can realistically be achieved. Because I don't know if anyone can legitimately say that 100% of all savings will be achieved in every year. But that's why you have contingency. And one of my provisions within contingency is to allow for those unknowns and slippage within the savings. But hopefully they're very few and far between. But that's what next year's budget assumes. In terms of asset management, so our assets, both operational assets and commercial assets, are really important to our financial sustainability in terms of our making sure that we've got the right level of operational assets and not too many, not too few, etc. And we're maximising both our use of our assets operationally, but also commercialising any, as you say, are there spaces that we could sell, that we could rent to community groups, etc., to generate an income. So that's really important. In our commercial portfolio, we are looking at every property that we've got in the commercial portfolio, looking at the leases that we've got in place, looking at the rents that we've got in place to ensure that they reflect the market. We do, however, recognise, and that is the right thing to do, we do, however, recognise that there are circumstances where, as you say, external factors, support to others, but they're almost treated as two slightly separate conversations. So it's really important that our rent reviews and our lease reviews are completely up to date, and that's where we're focusing. If there is a scenario where additional support is needed, then we have a separate conversation on that, because that, like I say, that first part is really important. So we are looking at that, but income generation is as important as reducing costs, so it's really important that we do that. In terms of the budget, so the reason we've got an overspend of 24 million at the moment is because we didn't get the budgets right. We have to say that. And as kind of Councillor White highlighted at the beginning, most of the, or half of the improvement is actually on the corporate budget. We are, so when I recommend the budget, I do so with the best will, that I genuinely think that that is the right budget and we can live within our means. We didn't get it right. What I would say is we have tried to strengthen that going into next year, much greater use of scenario planning. We were doing it last year, but probably not to the extent, particularly in the demand-led services. However, what I probably acknowledged is that we are going to still be carrying so much risk and uncertainty. It's almost impossible to set a precise budget, and therefore what I will be bringing forward is probably a higher level of corporate contingency to manage that risk than what I have done in previous years. So I want us to get more accurate with the budget setting, and we are reviewing the pressures every month. So every month we get more information. So, but we will be locking down numbers probably end of December, so in the not too distant future. So I will then need to decide how much corporate contingency that I think I need to manage that risk.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Lawson?
Yeah, a couple of hopefully brief questions. The first one is on page 24, 6.7. It talks about the a one-off use of contingency money to help the benefits team process claims. I wondered if there's a clear reason to believe these pressures essentially are so one-off that we can state that this is a one-off use of contingency. Obviously, I understand there are certain things like the move to universal credit, etc., but I wondered if that's enough to justify the concept that that same pressure won't increase with the general cost of living crisis, etc., going forward. And then maybe I'll leave it there. I've got another question. Okay, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Lawton, did you say 6.4?
Sorry, 6.7 on page 24.
6.7.
Sorry.
Yeah. So we have changed the way that we look at contingency in the current year. So whereas before it would just be essentially utilised at the year end to fund any overspend, I'm really keen that services have to make a bid into me and CLT if they want to use, because contingency is for unexpected, what wasn't anticipated, and it should be for one-off. If it's ongoing, then it needs to be built into future budgets. So we have now got a process in place where people have to come forward. So before they spend the money, they need to come forward and say, I've got this unexpected or what one-off spend that I need to make. Can I utilise contingency? So in 6.7, the benefits team did come forward, and just down to the significant workload that they have, they wanted a one-off injection of resources for a 12-month period to get on top of the workload. And therefore, at this stage, I can legitimately say it is a one-off. If there was any ongoing, now it is for a 12-month period, I quite often say that, so it might be that this was agreed in Q2, so they will have it kind of for 12 months going into next year. If it is recurring, then it should be coming through as part of the budget process as a pressure. So, any use of contingency should be considered one-off. It's time limited. It could be for 6 months, it could be less, it could be for slightly longer than 12 months. But yes, contingent. Otherwise, it's not contingency. Contingency wouldn't be appropriate because it's only a one.
So just to clarify on that, so I understand that, but I suppose my question is, and you may have covered that as they need to kind of apply to you, but how are you, I suppose, assessing things like that being one-off as opposed to a consistent? So I see that they come to you and say, we've got a really significant backlog, we want to clear it. That's a one-off, but is there a reason to assume that backlog isn't just going to mount as these benefit claims go further, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so it's a good challenge, isn't it? Because you kind of don't want to clear a backlog and then 6 months later be in a backlog. Again, can I explicit? I suppose I like to think that I know services well enough that I would hope to think that they are putting the change in as well as addressing the backlog. So I can talk about, there's a number of examples, kind of benefits and council tax where actually I can see that they are, but also there is a significant improvement in the process. Because if you don't have both, then as you say, Councillor Lawton, you're going to be in exactly the same position 6 months or 12 months down the line. So, do I ask for written evidence? Probably not, but I think it's a really good challenge. I suppose it's just insight and just the knowledge of the services and what they're working on. And also, if they came to me for a second bid, then that they haven't put the changes in place that need to be in place.
Thank you. May I ask another question, Chair? Thanks. So on page 29, under the 6.22, under income generation, it talks about a new council income generation programme, and then it says, however, this approach isn't delivering as expected so far, and so now it's being picked up through the finance recovery programme. I wondered if you could expand a bit on that and what's kind of gone wrong there and what we've misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah, so income generation is really important. It allows us to continue to fund services. We built in an assumption of 500,000 of new income that we could generate following a review that we did across services. The program it was delayed to get started, and I think I highlighted that cost cutting was the area that was worrying me in terms of delivery. So there is lots of income generation savings that are happening in the departments. This was more about saying actually across the council, we think there are further opportunities to generate an additional 500,000, which I thought at the time was quite a prudent figure, to be honest. But we have, being completely honest and open with you, we have struggled to get that piece of work going. We have probably not resourced it in the way that we should have done. And it's only now at the end of quarter 2 that we are starting to have those really active conversations about, over and above the income generation within individual services, where else can we go? So it is a timing issue. It is a resource issue, but we have recognised it now, and I hope that when I come to report quarter 3 to you in March or April, which feels a long time away, that we'd be in a different position, because 500,000 is quite a low number compared to kind of what could be some income potential. So I don't think we've fully exploited all the opportunities. It's just one that hasn't necessarily been prioritised, and it's a good example. And a key lesson that we've learned is that more of the plans need to be put in place before even the start of the financial year to get the full year effect. Because you wait until after budget council, you wait till the start of the year before quarter 1's here, then quarter 2. Actually, what we need to do, which is where we're absolutely focusing now, while we focus on the existing savings, we should be starting to think about where are those opportunities long before the start of the year.
I can see Councillor Small wants to come in, but also links to a question that I kind of wanted to ask, which was kind of related to the 5% staffing saving. And what I wanted to know really was, what are we doing to kind of track any negative impact of that saving? And that would be not only in terms of impact on remaining staff, in terms of increased workload, increased stress and all that kind of stuff, but also more pertinently to what this meeting is looking at, any knock-on effects that have a financial implication, like inability to generate the amount of income that we want to generate because we haven't got the staff to do it, etc. Not just that.
So each directorate was set a 5% target to reduce their staffing budgets. It was up to each individual corporate director to choose how best to do that, and that will vary from service to service. So it wouldn't make sense for an officer that is perhaps directly linked to generating income to the council to be part of that reduction. So there is a tool, I call it about a kit bag of different mechanisms that you can do to achieve your 5%, and it's for each individual service to choose that is most appropriate. And quite often, again in my area, that you take a directorate approach. This is not necessarily a 5% reduction in every single service, it's a 5% across the directorate. So it is, I suppose it is, how do I explain it? It's about identifying where that 5% could be made. It would be, it perhaps wouldn't be sensible if a particular post is generating an income, and therefore by removing a post, you reduce the income as well, which will be just counterintuitive. So, each individual corporate director has looked at their own area as a totality and kind of decided where best to apply that 5%. And it does vary, really does vary across the directorates. There is also some examples where the 5%, that's ongoing. So that money has come out of service budgets. There are some directorates, including my own, where I've identified one-off mitigation. So I cannot make my 5% in full until next year. So therefore I'm holding vacancies. I'm holding very tight on new recruitment, etc. That's appropriate for my directorate, but it may not be appropriate for another directorate. So it's a very mixed bag, and it might be something that individual panels want to explore with their individual services about how they've approached it. In terms of the negative impact, I'm a believer that you can, there will be an element of efficiencies, absolutely, but I don't believe that you can take significant numbers out of the workforce and still do the same. And therefore, as part of that exercise of where you take your 5%, you may well have to do some prioritisation in terms of work. And again, Councillor White, that will vary from each individual service about how they choose to do that. So again, I don't want to talk about other services, but certainly in my area, I take much more of a risk-based approach. So kind of where can I accept a bit more risk and where can I absolutely not, which is why I like to look at my directorate as a whole. So I can't say, we would carry out all, any restructure, any changes has to have a fully QIA, so that should pick up on any negative impacts. But I think it's just important to say it's very difficult to reduce a workforce of that amount and maintain the same workload. That isn't what it's about. It's about kind of prioritisation.
Thanks. Councillor Small.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pull out something you were just saying, Taryn, around the income generation point and it not having enough focus. And apologies, Chair, if this may be a better question for the budget scrutiny panel, but it feels within the papers there's sort of agonising, excruciating detail on the saving and spending. The savings that can be made in each individual service and so on, and very little detail about all the excruciating work detail to be done on income generation, each bit, each target, each element of this 1 million is now 1.5 million and so on. From your point of view, how much more, or how much is the emphasis completely skewed towards always trying to do savings as opposed to us being able to scrutinise or go through each quarter exactly what work is going on in income generation, and where there was we chastise the service for saying we were promised 3 million savings, you only managed 2.5 million. Would it be useful if we were also getting the detail in saying, and you were supposed to generate 1.8 million in income, congratulations, you've managed 2.2, or that kind of detail?
Yeah, so I think when you get into your panels and you get into the detail appendices, there are some very specific income targets, particularly within environment and resident experience. I think is the kind of where the majority of not the majority, but kind of a large element of the income is. So I think that is a very, so those service specific income opportunities are very specific. They're described in a very explicit way, and I think that's a really good challenge to have at your panel. Is there more that you can do, etc. This particular one was more over and above that. We would like to believe that we could generate at least an additional 500,000 from across a range of services across the council, and I still think that potential is there, but we just haven't done that more detailed piece of work. We we commissioned an external review. We know that the potential is there. We just haven't probably done the work to progress towards implementation and kind of really delving into the detail further. So, and that is just around resources, capacity and timing. I don't want to say to you that 500,000 isn't achievable. It is absolutely a focus now. Do we put the right amount of focus on income generation? I think we could strengthen it, to be honest. Whenever I almost describe savings in a very broad tent. It's about reducing costs and increasing income, whereas actually savings, everybody thinks it's about reducing costs. So there is something about a change in behaviour, change in culture, something about being a bit more commercial. Commercial means something different to everybody, and there's something about how commercial do we want to be in terms of income generation. I think we've got a bit of work to do in that space as well. But I can't sit here and say to you that we've exhausted every income opportunity to date.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. We do have some appendices attached to this report. Did you have another question on?
Sorry, Chair. I was wondering. I've been jotting down a few points as we've gone along about sort of not, I suppose, recommendations, maybe actions. Is it helpful to say at this point, or do you want to sum it all up at the end? Because I get lost, otherwise I'll forget them.
Go ahead.
No, it's only because I forget them otherwise. So I just wanted to pick up Councillor Small's point about, and I know you said we missed it before, but I think that column on page 35 and the starting budget, on that table. I think if we put it as a recommendation from the panel, then it gets picked up. I think what happens is we say it, you say that's a great idea, but it is actually really hard to go back and remember. The other one I had was on, I think, page 27. Oh yes, so for me, this is the question that I asked on page 27 about the savings. I wondered if it was at this point, Chair, whether we make it as a recommendation or just to sort of highlight the fact that we've scrutinised that total savings on table 3, and we have brought up the fact that we are concerned that there is that amount of 5.2 million in year savings to date at the moment of Q2, and yet we are supposed to be saving 22.9 million pounds. So it's a concern that we've noted that at this point, because we make recommendations as we go through as to areas we've scrutinised and we've just sort of highlighted. The other one that I had was
Sorry, what was the recommendation there?
so the recommendation was just to note that the concern, because Taryn's been saying to us the 5.27 in-year savings delivery at the moment at Q2 is what we've actually achieved, but we're actually supposed to be doing 22.9 million, and I think you pointed out the housing bit as well in that. Now I know, Taryn, you said that you've got confidence that this is going to be delivered, but obviously as a scrutiny committee, we've raised concerns at this point, and I think it just sort of points out the fact we've scrutinised this and we've raised this. I mean, you know, I've great hope that this is all going to be delivered as you said, but I think it just sort of notes, sort of says it at this point that we've raised that as a concern that we've noted. And I think on, I think the income generation thing that Councillor Small and Councillor Lawton brought up, I thought those, I mean, you said about the cross savings bit, and we've talked about digital before, but I think if we put it as a recommendation that we would like to see that in future reports around that income generation for OSC. I know we do it in our panels, but actually I think you're right. I think there is a lot more, and that would be really great to have. And then I think I also had, oh yes, so the one that I brought up at the beginning, and you said that you were going to come back to me on it, but just to capture at this point, was about the benefit at 6.5, and you were going to come back to me, or to the panel, sorry, about the how long the overpayment's been going on for and how much has the council lost over the years. So that was something that you said you were going to do, but I think I just sort of sum it up at that point. Apologies, Chair. 5.
I think on that it'll be quite important to distinguish the supported exempt accommodation, because that is where a lot of this money that we're losing on housing benefit is. And there's also the change over to universal credit, which at the moment is causing pressures. Yeah. I did ask officers if they thought that we would be able to realise a saving in terms of the numbers coming down of officers that we needed to administer housing benefit. But unfortunately, because things like exempt accommodation is complicated, so there's going to be quite a lot that still sits with housing benefit itself. The more complicated stuff still sitting with housing benefit.
Okay, thanks. And thanks, Councillor Connor. Okay, so just to hopefully quickly run through the appendices, because we are coming towards the end of the time allocated for this item. Obviously, Appendix 1 on children's services, Appendix 2 on adults housing and health. Those are going to go to the panels. Yeah. Appendix 3 on culture, strategy and communication. There's some stuff in there that's relevant, particularly the red saving on digital transformation, and there's similarly red saving on digital transformation on Appendix 6 as well. Don't know if anyone had any questions on that specifically. Well,
Page 65.
I was linking together the digital transformation savings read in two different areas and two different appendices that aren't consecutive appendices, but I thought rather than dealing with them separately. But if nobody has a question on Councillor
So
Connor.
I had a question on digital transformation, but I had it on page 74 and 75, which was under the finance and resources bit. So thank you.
Sorry. Apologies, it's in there as well.
So actually, it is in a number of them. 76. So so I think going back to I think we've raised the question here before, Taryn. So is there anything different in Q2 from Q1 in terms of the red rag rated status delivery that we're seeing than we saw in Q1? Are you more concerned about it at this point is kind of where I'm trying to get to.
So, so you will, and you'll see red in your panel. Some of you may see red in your panels as well. So it will be the same explanation. So I should give it here, and then you've all got it for your panel. Because I think if you ask service directors, they will probably point you in my direction, back in my direction anyway. So let me cover this off. So, and I think you had partly linked to the customer services update that you had a couple of meetings ago. We updated you on the service modernisation programme, which is about digital transformation and delivery of those savings. Now in 25-26, the savings target at the time, a decision was taken to allocate out to services. Essentially, I think it was based on their net budget. So we allocated that. So you're in 25-26, you will see an allocation in each service, and you will see most of them red. I think possibly adults isn't red, but there is, but a large proportion of them are. But for next year, we have held them corporately because the service modernisation programme is a cross-cutting programme that is looking across all council services at digital opportunities. Now, there is a limit to what, you can't do everything in one go, and therefore there is a board that is chaired by myself. It's got all of the corporate directors on. We have a criteria about how we prioritise the projects that come through, and the priority at the moment is around adults, housing and housing demand, partly because of the, I suppose, to some extent, particularly the latter, the impact on customer services, but equally that is where some of our significant financial pressures are. And we do have a criteria, as you say, we work through. Now, the knock-on effect is that means that there are other directorates that aren't on that priority list. So they will, over the course of the programme, we will get through all of the transformation, but at the moment we're very explicitly focusing on adults, housing demand, and so I think Councillor Connor, I've got assurance that the programme is starting to deliver, but in the two appendices that you pointed out relevant to this OSC, I think I will still be reporting red in Q3 and the end of year because of the reason that we've chosen to consciously prioritise adults and housing.
Sorry, I think it's just my brain's probably not quite functioning. On page 75, so say you just look at 25-26, you've got 101. Projected full year savings 101. The savings either surplus or shortfall is 0, but it's red. So so this is why I was just wondering what's going on, because in all the figures it looks like, so yeah, could you just explain what's going on in those columns?
These are both mine, so I'm going to have to, because how the so the explanation that I've just given you is 100% correct, but it doesn't align with this. So the savings tracker, to align with the explanation, that 101, oh no, that's right. Sorry, no, that is right. Sorry, I've got my bearings. So what that's saying is, oh no, it's not. Sorry.
Could I just point out that in
Yeah.
this table there are no shortfalls anywhere in the table? So I feel like maybe there's been an error in producing the
is,
table.
sorry.
Maybe what we should do is ask for
Can I
table
come
to
back
be redone.
to you? Sorry, I hadn't picked that up. What those two that you've picked out, those two red should show, is they should say the 0 in the projected full year savings and the 101 and 200 in the shortfall, because they're both red, they're not going to be delivered. But you're correct. I'm sorry, I didn't pick up. I would like to think I'm delivering all my savings in full, but
I think the whole table, I think as the chair pointed out, if you go back up, everything is, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got it across all the greens, the ambers and the reds. It's
Yeah,
the similar.
okay.
So I wasn't quite sure where the shortfalls were in relation to, what was being.
So everything, so I've got confidence in the rags, everything that's rated amber or red should be showing a shortfall. And that's where, so if I can send round the correct table with the, to
Thanks.
committee, so I deeply
Yeah.
apologise about that.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, if we just, it's just a clerical error, isn't it? But we'll if we could get the correct figures in the table. I think the narrative in the explanation is clear and the rag ratings are clear. So it's just, yeah.
No, I just noticed it as we go.
Sorry, Chair. I'll also check the other tables for your panels as well, just to make sure. I don't know. I don't think any of you have had your panel meetings yet, have you? Okay, I'll check that.
Okay, thanks for that. So, so if we're okay with the digital transformation savings, then just looking quickly at Appendix 4, I just wanted to note that there aren't any really big moves. The 303,000 move in the headline figure. Negative move at the top line, but just to note that the 125,000 positive movement actually masks some fairly large movements in both directions below. So I don't know if Taryn wanted to comment on those because they're quite big. So,
Sorry, Chair, where are you looking? Sorry.
Appendix 4, so
Okay.
page 71. Page 71. And the other thing that I wanted to ask about, because there didn't seem to be any narrative on this in the report, was the last line in the table, which was the Chief Executive's office, and that seems to have a overspend of 169,000 on a base budget of 115,000, and just if there could be some explanation of that, please.
I like to think I can answer every question you throw at me, but that is one detail on that last line that I haven't got in my head. Can I come back to you on that? Because actually in my head, this is all me. This is all my directorate and I can fully explain all my figures about, can I come back to you, Councillor White? I'm really sorry. I just need to understand the overspend in that area, and apologies it was missed out of the narrative.
Okay, so if we could get a written answer on the chief exec point,
Yes.
and maybe if you could provide some narrative on the kind of the big movements that we've got.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the big movement, so it's around that capital projects and property line, of which actually I think it's a combination of sitting under this portfolio, but also Councillor Small, I think kind of corporate landlord and things sits under your panel as well. So you're right, there is some quite significant movements both ways within that capital projects and property. Look, I would draw out the corporate property model, and I think I kind of alluded to this when we went through the budget a couple of weeks ago, because there was a pressure in there of 1.75 million. We reported a fairly significant overspend on the corporate landlord model at Q1. I think it was just over 600,000 because we'd consolidated it all, and we'd essentially, what emerged was pressures around utility bills and business rates, etc. We have, I said it would take time to fully embed that model. We have now done that, and that's that really favourable movement in that we are broadly balanced now on the corporate landlord model, which is a bit of a sigh of relief for me. But as you say, Councillor Small, there is some quite significant movements, and I suppose I would draw attention. I think this is relevant to this portfolio. This scrutiny panel is around paragraph 1.5, which is around the capitalisation of staff. So again, Councillor Small, it may come up in yours, but I think it is relevant here because it's more of a corporate type issue. We have identified, particularly within the major projects service, staff costs that have been capitalised but should be classed as revenue. So that is a pressure. That is accounting practice. We cannot capitalise costs if there is not an asset. So Councillor Small, those are the two. I think in terms of strategic property, those are the same issues that I talked about last quarter, but there are two quite significant movements there.
Okay, thanks for that. Any more questions on this bit of the report?
Not on Appendix 4.
Not on Appendix 4. Okay. So moving on to Appendix 5, we've actually talked through some of this stuff earlier in the meeting. So I don't know if anyone has any further questions on this area because we've kind of been through it a bit. I can see Councillor Connor.
Sorry. So I've got one on the, I think at 1.3, you're saying about the non-delivery of 3 council-wide savings of 5.1 million. And in that you've got the enabling services review, which is project management. And I wasn't really sure sorry, I read it a few times. I'm still not quite sure what that means and what savings we're supposed to be, or you're supposed to be enabling from it. Thank you.
If I just give a brief summary of what the Enabling Services Review. So this is essentially looking at what we call enabling services. Some may call it, so non-frontline services, shall we say. So it's kind of project management, finance, business support, HR, digital comms and engagement. And what that review is doing is looking at what is the right model for those services for the council. So we have got probably a mix of centralised functions, we might have decentralised functions, we might have a mixed model in some cases. And what this review is doing is looking across each one in turn. So we started with project management, is looking at all posts across the council that do those functions and to see what the best operating model is for the council. And it could, we're not preempting anything, it could be a centralised model, it could be decentralised, it could be hub and spoke, could be something different, but it's about identifying how do we make the most use of those resources, the right model for the council, but also I suspect it will identify areas of duplication as well and kind of efficiencies.
So I suppose a very quick follow-up on that is the projected full year savings is 100,000, where you've got 900,000 shortfall. So is that you've made 100,000 on that? So sorry, on page 84, the projected full.
Yeah, that is correct, Councillor Connor. It's this one is, with quite a few of the cost-cutting ones, you can see they're all red. We probably put the immediate focus on the service-specific ones and actually compromise the delivery of the cost-cutting ones. So that one is by its very nature. So again, that one is underway, but it was much slower to get started, and therefore we have got a shortfall. We are confident on the 100. We have only looked at project management at this stage, so I kind of summarise the other services that would be part of the Enabling Services Review over the next year or two. So there is a shortfall of 900,000, but we are our budget for next year will assume that will be delivered in full, but there will be a shortfall this year.
Okay, so the projected full year savings is actually the savings you've currently made at Q2, not the savings you're going to make at the end of the year, because you've got the 100. Yeah, so
that table is saying we are supposed to be making £1 million savings in 25-26. By the time we get to the year end, we think we'll only make 100, and therefore we've got a 900,000 short.
So you think in the next one, the commission procurement and contract management, you're not going to make any savings? So projected full year savings is 0.
So this is one of mine. I think that is a very, very, very pessimistic view. I know that figure isn't 0. So I chair the commissioning board. It won't be the 3 million, and actually for that one we've got 9 million over 3 years. I can say it will still be red because we won't make the 3 million and we would be a long way short. Again, that project didn't really get started and off the ground until I would say end of Q1. There is two elements to it. One is about reviewing all of our existing contracts, and there is much fewer savings coming out of our existing contracts. Where those savings will be delivered is around the recommissioning of contract, and it's about the commissioning of contracts. By the time you get to procurement, actually you're quite limited. It's about managing the market. Where we are really going to drive out those efficiencies and reductions is around the services that we commission. So so this for me is a saving where we have chosen, or I've made the decision that I want to put a much more sustainable approach to delivery of those savings rather than, kind of just looking at all the existing contracts, because I don't think that's where the potential is going to come. It's going to be from right at the beginning and the commissioning of services.
Okay, thanks. Right, so next appendix is appendix 6, I think. I've not skipped one, have I? So most of this doesn't come under the remit of this committee. There's a couple of savings in there, but we've dealt with one of them already. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on this appendix. No? Okay, appendix 7 also doesn't come under this committee. So we've got 3 more appendices. I don't know if anyone's got any questions on the proposed environments. No. What about the debt write-off? We did discuss that a little bit earlier. So perhaps we've dealt with that. Okay. So the last appendix is the finance response and recovery plan. Does anyone have any questions on that we haven't already discussed? Councillor Connor.
Yes, thank you. And I thought Appendix 10 was really helpful, actually. That was really useful for me to sort of get an understanding of where your direction of travel. I think on page 125, under improving forecasting accuracy, and you start a similar exercise underway to the strategic property budget, which the latest forecast shows continues to be a high risk area on the strategic property budget. So I was just trying to tease out a little bit what you meant by, in the strategic property budget, what area was high risk and how much money are we looking at in that modelling? Thanks.
Yeah, so and we've I mean there's something here generally about our forecasting and continually trying to improve and get them as accurate as possible, and the scenario planning. Within the update we've given a couple of specific examples. So on the strategic property, we're almost doing not quite zero-based budgeting exercise on it. So we did do something very similar on adults recently. Strategic property budget is one of mine. Really wanted to get under the skin of what is happening both on the spend side but also the income side. So I've been reporting now for the last couple of quarters the shortfall on the income target. So almost deep diving into the strategic property budget of what is the budget, where are we realistically. We have got some underachievement on our income and trying to understand, is that historic? Has that been there for a number of years? We've got some overspends in areas and really understanding what those cost drivers are, so that then for future years, it's about getting to the right budget and then to be able to hold me to account for delivery on that budget, but also coming back to the income generation. So it's more the deep dive into unpicking almost every cost centre. It's a bit of almost going back to not a blank sheet of paper, but really understanding not just at a strategic property level, but a much more granular level in terms of what's the budget, what's the cost driver, what's the income driver, what's the shortfall for going forward.
So a very quick question would be, so what sort of money are you thinking? I mean, have you got to that point yet where you're thinking, well, if I do this and if there's a lot of work put into this, the potential is we're talking hundreds of thousands, millions. What I think it's obviously not a breakdown at all, but it's just a rough idea for us to understand.
I think my priority at the moment is less about giving us more opportunities and more potential for income, I'm carrying a significant shortfall on that budget. And the work that we are doing is about getting us to a budget that balances both on the income and spend side. So I think your question is more about what's the future potential. I probably have the view I want to get to a position where we're actually meeting the budget that we've got, and then we can have a really honest not us, but I can have a really honest conversation with myself and my service about now, particularly with the rent reviews and the lease reviews, right, what is the future potential going there? But at the moment, we're making really, really good progress in that area, significant progress. However, it is still just addressing a shortfall in an income budget that's been there for a number of years.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions on this part of the report? It appears not. Oh, one more question from
Can I
Councillor
just
Conlon.
ask this question because it kept popping out at me. So page 129, on the second one down, it says single dashboard in place, and it says one version of the truth. Now I love that, but I was quite intrigued as to why it was in there and what, in a few sentences. This does not need to be a long answer, but it just seemed an unusual phrase, and it's in these sort of inverted commas. So I just thought I'd ask what that actually was trying to underpin.
So I'm a big fan of dashboards. That's what the data says, and you can interrogate it. We have a few challenges where we have multiple ways of collecting information, financial forecasts and RAG ratings, etc. And what I want to avoid us being in a position is that we report one RAG rating. Let's take the RAG ratings as an example, or one forecast in this report, and yet somewhere else there's a different spreadsheet that says a different forecast. For me, it's about a dashboard is a way of, it is owned corporately, it's owned by the council, we review it at Financial Recovery Board. It's one version of the truth. It's really important, and all I'll say is that we haven't quite got to where we want to be. But that's what we're trying to achieve on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I actually did have one final question, which I should have asked earlier in the meeting, really, but it was just about the disposals, and I noted paragraph 9.13 talks about the disposals and refers to a cabinet report, but of course that cabinet report is exempt. So is there any mechanism through which the disposals that it refers to, the list of disposals that are being that are happening this year and then again in the future according to this policy, whether that can be scrutinised in any way? I'm just wondering, because we're talking about a significant. Thanks. Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because I think it might, there might be some interest in knowing if we are disposing of properties, assets. There might be interest in knowing what it is that we're disposing of, and at what point that can be scrutinised. But obviously that would happen through Councillor Small's panel.
I think that's right. I think as Taran said, it's around commercial sensitivity really that's the need to check. For some reassurance, if you're in receipt of EFS, you're specifically precluded from disposing of anything that's considered to be a community asset. Everything that is put forward in terms of a disposal will also still go through the SAMPA program. So it will still go through the same program as any disposal always goes through, which is, can it, you know what I mean? Can it be used for anything else? Can it be used for the council? You know, all of those kinds of those, all of those. There is a concern for us to, if I can put it, keep the politics out of property, so that everything goes through a very kind of, in terms of SAMPIP, a very objective and logical process, so that it's not vulnerable to lobbying or to any interests, whether they're ours or anybody else's, and to try and protect the process in terms of that. But as I said, all disposals go through SAMPIP, and that was set up specifically to make sure that it's done in a very objective and logical way in terms of what properties come forward. Nothing will be a community asset. It has to be something that we're not going to need as council, that it's not worth us keeping. So it comes within the same, within that framework.
Okay, thanks. I suppose I would understand issues of, you know, commercial confidentiality and all the other matters that you talked about, but they obviously need to be balanced against the need for scrutiny to be able to be assured that, you know, that not only that when we are disposing of assets that we're getting the best value, and that when assets are being disposed, we're not losing something that has more than a financial value, losing it permanently. And I would also be somewhat skeptical of an argument that says doing something in secret makes it more likely to be done properly and according to the rules than doing it in public. But there you go.
There's that recommendation, Chair.
Well, the recommendation is to we want to know what is feasible and what is possible for us to be able to scrutinise what's going on here.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Sorry, I think that brings us to the end of this very lengthy item. I'm going to hand over the chair now to Councillor Connor, because this item is part of the 2025-26 budget that we didn't finish off last week. So item 9, previously agreed savings. Councillor Connor.
Brilliant, thank you. This is on pages 1 to 4 in the supplementary. So we're getting an update on progress against savings under the remit of OSC, approved in previous years, but being implemented during the forthcoming MTFS period. Can I just ask at the outset, just for ease, it's when we've got agreed savings, and we've got how much they're going to be in 26 and future, it's really helpful to know how much we've already achieved in that saving. So if this is a new saving that is just coming for 26, 27, that's fine. But if there's something that is being followed through, so have we already made 5 million and we're just on the last 200,000, or yeah. So if I could ask for a column in that, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to we're going to look at agreed savings. We've also got pressures in this report. Before we start looking at the savings, I'm just going to ask Taryn, is there anything that we as a committee need to be looking at, because it's in the papers under the area of pressure, that you want to highlight to us that you think we should be asking further questions on, scrutinising further?
Gosh, no pressure on me, is that? So none of so we'll insert the, you know, we'll it's fine. We can insert the 25-26 column and recirculate it round to you. So none of this is new. This will all have been in the budget, and so the budget that was agreed in by council in March, it would have been set out in detail. So, you know, kind of you would have seen exactly this detail, or it could have been, particularly the pressures, could have been in the MTFS, which you saw in July. So like I say, none of this is new. And I think what this document, and I think a couple of, well, one or two of the other panels asked for it as well, is that when you saw the budget report here a couple of weeks ago, they were almost just shown as a single line of previously agreed savings and pressures. All this is doing is giving you almost the breakdown of that single line that you would have seen in that budget report. So they were all agreed. I would say, particularly the savings were all agreed last year in March. In terms of the pressures, so these are the pressures that, and you can see the dates actually. So we keep pressures up to date well, we try to keep them up to date all the time. So we would have had an estimate of pressures in 26, 27 when we bought the budget in March. Then when we brought you the MTFS in July, we would have updated our pressures, and that's what so the combination of those two you're seeing in that table. And then what you saw 2 weeks ago was the new pressures almost since you've seen in July. So, for me, I suppose there isn't one particular area that, I suppose it's about giving you a reminder of the kind of previously approved savings. So we saw the new savings, didn't we, last time? It's reminding you the previously approved savings. They've been through consultation, they've been agreed, so they're not kind of open for, I guess, debate or consultation now, but it's just a reminder. I mean, to be honest, the pressures, these were at a point in time. What we were showing you last couple of weeks ago in the budget was how we've taken these figures, we've updated and reviewed over the summer, and in most cases, but not all, we had to increase the pressures. But there are other areas, and I'm trying to think of an example, I think it was pay inflation, where we actually reduced the pressure that we needed. So, I mean, we've shared it. I think there was a request to share it for information. We've done that. I'm not necessarily sure there is nothing, sorry, Councillor Connor, that I would particularly pick out, but I just thought it was helpful giving that context of when you see it just as a table on its own without any covering note or an explanation. I mean, one of the things that we might do next year, she says, thinking 12 months ahead, is, when we bring you the budget proposals in November, actually we just attach this as an appendix to that report, because it's almost out of context, but our commitment was to share it with you. So I don't know what questions you can ask, but
No,
I'm sure.
that's fine. I just thought because, seeing the list like this, I just thought I'd ask at this point. Okay, so open to questions. So we've got the agreed savings. The first one, we've got corporate costs, 1 million in 26, 27. Is there any questions that anyone wants to ask on? We've just done enabling services review. So to be fair, we actually have just asked this question. So I'm just checking there's nothing else anyone wants to ask. Okay. The next one is procurement and contract management. Again, we've touched on procurement and contract management. So is there anything specific? Nope. Okay. Right. So these were the ones that we've got OSC, but it's under culture. So fine. Okay. I'm just making sure that everyone's quite clear that this is why we're looking at it. So again, there's a service pressures, the first two. And I think we talked about elections last time, actually. So agreed savings under the environment, that's actually savings. It's reduction in housing benefit accommodation costs. I mean, I suppose, is that because I'm assuming the benefit's changing? This is why it's not on. Is it ongoing, or because you've only got the 200,000 and then total 200,000, so it's a 1 year? Is that because the benefit's changing?
That is ongoing. So what that's saying is 200,000 will come out in 26, 27, and I can see now why it'd be helpful to see the 25, 26 column. But then there's not further savings in future years. But that 200k comes out, doesn't come out and then go back in. It comes out kind of forever. I suppose I would just draw your attention to the environment, the one below, the which relates to housing benefit, because it does link to a pressure that you saw in the budget 2 weeks ago. So to all the work that we're doing on housing benefit, we thought that we put additional 3.5 million into the budget in 25-26. What this line is saying, so that one that's showing a total of 3 million, is that we felt that we could reverse that out. So we put 3.5 million in 26-27. We thought that we could essentially reverse out 1 million of it, and then a further 2 million in 28-29. You'll recall, and I know I'm testing all your memories, you'll recall Greg talked about a pressure that was in the budget report, particularly for housing benefit. And what that pressure is saying, because our plans assume that we could basically take out 1 million, we put in 3.5, and it was saying 26-27 we could take out 1 million. Where the services at the moment, that's no longer possible. So what that pressure was that Greg was talking about was saying we can't achieve that £1 million savings now, so we've got to put it back in. So that makes sense.
So is that what other adjustments means?
Yeah,
Sorry, I
that's
wasn't
just
quite
our
sure.
category. I mean, look, I'd love, everyone's got every one of these is probably slightly nuanced, I suppose, but they're just some broad category headings for us. But I suppose the agreed savings, it's because it's not a it's this line isn't necessarily a saving, it's just reversing the growth out that was given in 25-26. That's why it's classified as an other adjustment rather than a saving.
I was going to say I'm looking to Councillor Small on this one.
Can I just clarify though, if the £1 million is now coming out in 26-27, on this table, it's also we're also taking the 2 million out in 28-29.
So that's the assumption. So in 25-26 budget, we put 3.5 million into housing benefit. What this is saying is that in 26-27, we would have done all the work that we were supposed to have done, and that additional money that we put in the current year, we think we can take 1 million out 26-27, and then a further 2 million 28-29. When we talked about the budget a couple of weeks ago, we heard from Greg, we now can't take that 1 million out because we're not where we need to be. But at this point, I mean, 28-29 is still a fairly long way away. We were still assuming that we could potentially take out that 2 million, but we'll keep it under review every year. I mean, 28-29 is 3 budget rounds away, so we may well have a completely different assumption by the time we get to it. Hopefully what this document is demonstrating is almost the iterative process that we go through to get to potentially the right budget.
And if I could just come in on it, this really goes back as well to what I was saying, which was that the anticipation was that everybody was going to move to universal credit, and then what would happen was we wouldn't be administering housing benefit anymore because everyone would be on universal credit. There would be no more housing benefit. But what has now become apparent is that in actual fact we're holding on to pensioners, we're holding on to a whole lot of groups of people in exempt supported, etc. Some of the really much more complicated work as well, they're not going on to universal credit. And they're saying, okay, now you're still holding all of that in housing benefit. So there was also an assumption that we were not going to be doing housing benefit. The councils were no longer going to be administrating
Thank
doing
you.
it at all.
So,
But now in actual fact, we are. And so that's also.
so just to be really clear from Councillor Small, so we are going to be looking at the savings of the 2 million in 28-29, but we're not now going to be looking at the savings of 20 in 26. So that 1 million, so that total of 3 million should now be 2 million.
Weeks ago as a new pressure. Does that make sense? Which is why you have to look at this table within the context. So apologies, this wasn't available. It's probably quite hard. We almost need to rerun the budget session, don't we? From 2 weeks ago, but I wouldn't put any of you through that. What I would say is if it gives you a little bit of consolation, when you see everything come together in your January meeting, you will see it all together in one place. Yeah.
You know what? We're going to remember that line. So
I
I'm
know.
sure that is now ingrained. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So the next one is agreed savement in London Consortium Partnership income.
Yep.
I'm assuming these are on track and yep, you're okay. I haven't got anything to ask on that one. Okay. Reduce cost of internal audit contract. Does that mean we're reducing our internal audits? Because I do like an audit.
Yeah, so we currently have a contract with Mazars who do our internal audit. That's due to end at the end of February, and therefore we'll be going out for a new contract, and we are forecasting that we can make a very small kind of reduction on the contract just by almost competitively retendering that contract.
So no actual change in the amount of audit we do. Fine. Okay. Yeah, no questions. Capital projects. Increased income. Any questions? No, that's agreed. Okay, I've got agreed savings on more capital projects. That's the asset management, which we have. I saw different figures in the papers here on asset management. Did I see a savings of 350,000? It might have been in current year. Okay, so in current years, it's 350,000. Well, and wasn't that reduced from 700 and something? Sorry, this is now from memory because I can't find it in my papers. Wasn't it in 24 we had 789 in February 24. Then in 25, February 25 we had 350,000. So what this is the bit that I was a bit confused at. We seem to have, we were going to make a lot of savings in 24, but at 25 it's almost halved. Well, it is half, more than halved. And then it's going back up again to 450 in 26, 27. So I just wasn't quite sure what's going on with this line in the.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the 24-25 savings actually. So what I will, is that from a
It was on
previous
page-
report?
So it's in your report. It's on page 85. You know, we can go back to it, but it's apparently on page 85 in February 24. It said previously agreed commercial income savings of 789,000. And then on page 75, I noticed the asset management again with a similar savings was 350. So I was just trying to marry up the, tally up these different amounts.
So, oh, sorry, didn't turn my mic off.
I can take a written answer back.
I may well take that away. Sorry, because I think so on page 85, I think there's two different savings. So page 85 of the report that we've just been looking at is not around commercial property. It's around commercial income. So it's around kind of advertising, etc. Is that the one you're looking at, the 789?
Okay, so I've got I've got commercial income saving, then I've got commercial portfolio with the other one.
Yeah.
And this one is commercial portfolio.
Yeah.
So the other one was a difference. Commercial income is different to commercial portfolio.
It is, yeah.
Right,
Commercial.
okay. Okay, so it's gone from 350 then to 450. So you think you're going to be making more? Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay. Right, with digital. So we've discussed digital. Just out of interest, why have we got the 0 on 26, 27?
So the budget, so the digital savings went in February, and they were forecast as, I think it's 2.8 million in 25-26, 2 million in 26, if you go back to the budget report, 2 million in 26, 27 and 2 million in 27, 28. I think that's right. What this line is showing is that because of the nature of the service modernisation programme, and we don't think that we're going to make the full 2.8 million savings in 25, 26, rather than then saying, well, we've got to make 4.8 million in 26, 27, what this is saying is that we're just going to reprofile it. So we're still going to make the 6.8 over the life of the programme, but we're going to use 26, 27 not to put additional save. So we're just reprofiling it, Councillor Connor. And so we're pushing back. So what we're saying is in 26, 27, there'd be no new savings. We will just focus on the full delivery of the existing savings in 25, 26.
Just to clarify, but that is because we are failing to deliver the savings as quickly as we hoped. So it is a sort of movement, shifting it onwards, perhaps to reflect reality, but it is a reality that is less optimistic than it was when we set it. Which I was just going to ask as a sort of related question, and this may be completely unfair, but come back to that question around the commercial question. It does feel like the income generation, the commercial bit, the innovation element of digital is the bit that always sort of lags and falls behind and falls, short.
I think corporately that is recognised, as Taran has said. The focus was very much, there was quite a lot of work to do to deliver the savings and to bring changes into our directorates in terms of accurate forecasting, in terms of especially our big spend directorates, like adults, children's, temporary accommodation, those, big overspends. I agree with you, and I share your frustration. Is that what we have to look at is if something's going to be delivering us an income, we need to finance that properly. And what we've seen in terms of something like digital, for example, this council's been talking about digital transformation since I became a councillor, but it's only really in the last couple of years that the resource has been put into digital to actually deliver that transformation. And that's the difficulty always, and we're in the financial position that we're in. It's how to actually invest. The real investor saves is how to find that balance. I think it is, but it is recognized. It's recognized corporately, and it's part of what we really need to do, because being in a situation with EFS is not sustainable. Let's stabilize our services, but then we have to turn to the cross-cutting savings across the council, the enabling kind of reviews on that, and also the looking at where we make money in terms of what are our assets and how can we make money from those assets. And coming back to what Councillor White was concerned about earlier, in terms of our corporate property, how do we make money from our, what do we have in the account? What do we have that we can make money out of? And looking to those things going forward. And that is something that takes resource. So it's how to then manage the resource to actually deliver. But it is something that corporately, officers are very aware of.
Councillor Connor, can I just say something briefly on digital, because I think it's really important. So the digital, I think we're really fortunate. I sing the praises of our digital team. I think we are very, very fortunate in terms of we've got our own development team, but that team only really went live kind of February, March this year. And I've got all faith in that team, and I think we've got about 42, I think it's 42, but it's certainly over 40 projects now actively underway, going through discovery, going through that process. So it probably only, I know we've been talking about it for a number of years, but it's probably only really been since February, March time that we've had that team in place, and we are starting to see the fruition of it. It's just we were too optimistic about how much we could realistically deliver in 25, 26. So that's about saying having a more realistic view.
And sorry, and as an aside, we have a more comprehensive offer for services in terms of a digital offer of bespoke programming, bespoke programs, almost than any other council. What we're doing is going to save us a lot of money, because we know that the cost of procuring digital products for any kind of public service is astronomical. And so whatever we can deliver in-house by having a bespoke, by having these bespoke teams, this is groundbreaking, but will also be completely changing most of our a lot, we've got a solid permanent staff cohort working on this, and we're very lucky to have that. But as Taran said, and as I said, we never put the resource in before. We subsequently put the resource. We built that team, and they're starting to deliver. But it's that will come in future years. We're going to see that. So it's not it hasn't delivered this year, but it is going to, they are working on 40 different projects, and it will deliver the digital transformation that we need to see.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions, Councillor Small, on that? Nope. So we've got other adjustments, which is capital projects and property. Any questions on that? No. Other adjustments, IT, we've got the school landlord function and the asbestos survey, and we've got the low income tracker, family tracker system, contract cost reducing. I didn't have any questions on those. Anyone? Nope. Okay. So Taryn, just at the very end, you've got total management actions and then total agreed budget changes for 26, 27 of 24 million. Is that where you'd be expecting us to be at this point?
Sorry. So that number will be different because that was just the previously approved and what was up until July. We will then be incorporating the new pressures and the new. I think within this scrutiny committee, it's mainly management actions. There will be more management actions, which is what you saw in the budget report. So that would have been the position as at July. You would have seen additional figures in the budget report that you saw 2 weeks ago. But all I'll say is that we will keep our pressures under review all the way until I have to send those papers to print, so to speak, but realistically till kind of before Christmas, because then we start, I think you as a panel see the budget report, it's something like the 12th. It's quite early, well, it's January anyway, so yeah, so we'll need to lock down the numbers soon. So that number will change for a number of different reasons.
Thank you. I've got nothing further to add for that agenda item. No. Okay, over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so item 9 on the agenda is new items of urgent business, of which we have none. Oh, and also to say, Taryn and Councillor Carlin, thank you very much for coming this evening. You may leave if you want. Item 10 is our work programme, which we always come to at the end of the meeting when we're really tired and we just want to go home. So it's just to note really that the next meeting we've got is on the 19th of January, and that's going to be the budget meeting. So that'll be where we finalise all our recommendations for Cabinet. The meeting after that is on the 12th of February, and I don't believe we've got any finance items coming to the committee that evening. So, Taryn, you might have a night off. You never know. But what that means is that we need some suggestions for items for that meeting. We've got penciled in on the work programme worklessness as a topic. So we could certainly bring something on that. But does anyone have any burning issues that fall under the committee's remit that they'd like to see a report that we can scrutinise on in February? If you haven't got anything to mind now, it would be really, really good to get the suggestions within the next week, I'd say, because if we want to get reports written by officers for that meeting on the 12th of February, we need to commission them before we go away for Christmas. So have a think and come back to either me or Dominic or both of us, and we'll see. Oh, but I can see Councillor Lawson has a suggestion.
No, I actually have a few suggestions, but I wondered if what's the best way to approach it in terms of, is it best to just go directly to you or to Dominic, or can we email this group, like as in meaning?
Why don't you send an email with us all copied in?
Yeah, I was going to say, can I consult the whole group by email rather than a direct
email conversation?
Yeah, is that all right? Is that allowed?
That is
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Probably the best way to do it.
Just in terms of if anyone else also has suggestions, it would be good to know, like if we could all analyse them or decide which one's best. Thanks.
Great. Look forward
I
to
feel like
seeing
it's really good to look at something that isn't finance. And we should
It's-
choose carefully what it is.
finance is good.
No, it is really good, but it ends up being the majority, and actually there's lots of other areas. That's all. I'm not demoting the financial importance. I just think there's lots of other things that we end up not looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to note on the finance meeting on the 19th of January, so as well as the all the recommendations from the panels that we'll be considering, there's also the Treasury management statement, and we may also get an update from Taryn on the local government finance settlement and where how that has changed things. I just looked at the minutes from last year, and we actually started the meeting a little bit earlier last time at 6:30. I was just wondering, with all of that we've got to fit in, at the moment it's scheduled for a 7 o'clock start on the 19th of January. I'm just sort of thinking there's quite a lot to fit in. Yeah.
Normally, don't we have at least an hour's training with the Treasury Management team before the Treasury Management strategy agenda item and then budget? So it's a long.
I believe so. Philip did this last year, so I will check with him on exactly what the choreography has been on that. I think you're right about the earlier session. I just checked that. So last year the meeting was from 6:30 p.m. till 9:45 p.m. So it was just to put it out there. We can keep it at 7 o'clock. Of course, we can move it to 6:30. It's really just up to the committee as to what they prefer.
What would feasibly be the earliest time that people could actually be physically here in the room?
5:30.
Slight caveat of childcare pending. 5:30 if I can sort childcare, which I probably can with this sort of notice, but the more notice the better for that for me.
So shall we say then that we'll make a plan on the basis that whatever we need to be in this room for, whether it's training or an early start of a meeting, that none of that can start before 6 p.m. but 6 p.m. is fine.
I'll check on all that and send a schedule round.
Can I just ask a related question, Chair, on the papers? And I've never suggested this to Dominic before, so apologies, this brings on now. I find a hard copy really helpful, and I really appreciate that the hard copy is provided for us here at the meeting, but I'm sort of duplicating at the minute because I need a hard copy before the meeting in order to write notes on and so on. And I appreciate we're saving on postage costs by not getting it to us, but we're sort of losing on the fact that we're having a printed copy, but it only comes to us here. I personally would recommend we sort of do one or the other, where we either don't have printed copies provided to us at the meeting and we just sort ourselves out in whichever way works best, or if we are going to have printed copies, if we could have them sent to us when they're ready in advance of the meeting, then we can scribble on them, write notes and bring them with us. So they
Can I go further than that and recommend that we just have printed copies sent, because I don't have like a printer or any means to do it, and I also find a hard copy so helpful, and so I end up half writing notes on my phone on the email one, and then I come here and I'm like rewriting quickly because I can actually see it in paper. So I would find it immensely useful to have a hard copy somehow get to me pre the meeting.
Yeah, I was going to third that suggestion, just because actually 'cause the next meeting when we've got the panel stuff as well, it's really helpful to have seen it beforehand because we're all reading each other's recommendations, which is, yeah, it's so much easier to have it. So if we could get that one copy at least sent to us.
Yeah, no, it's possible. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm just checking out. I'm not sort of breaking any rules on all the sort of restrictions there are at the moment. But yeah, I'm sure it'll be. I'm sure.
I do get my children's panel thing sent
Yeah,
to me, so yeah.
I do post some out for adults panel as well, actually. So yeah, it does happen in other panels. I'm just putting a slight caveat. I'm sure it'll be fine.
I think if people want hard copies sent to them, then that's fine. I'm quite honestly, I'm happy with, for me, the way it works at the moment, but I do kind of need a hard copy in the meeting if I'm chairing the meeting, because if the computer goes down, I need to have a hard copy in front of me. But no, I don't need it sent to me. But maybe people can, yeah, if people want them sent to them, then that's fine.
So receive a hard copy to me, yeah, by post.
Okay, thanks everyone. I think that's it. Yep. Okay, meeting's over. Oh yeah, have a good Happy New Year.